Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new Sleep Token album, Even in Arcadia. Even in Arcadia is the fourth album from the British alternative rock band Sleep Token, who are a band that are notoriously disliked by a lot of music nerds and music critics, mainly for their just much softer and much poppier approach to metal, and also a lot of their genre blending sounding quite unnatural. It's all about expectation, and I think for the most part, at least for their first three albums, their music is good at what it does, as long as you can accept that what it does isn't metal. Like, if I wanted to listen to metal, I would much rather just go and listen to Gojira or Metallica, System of a Down, Death, stuff in that kind of league. However, I think that Sleep Token definitely do still have their place in the world of music and are still, for the most part, good at what they do. However, I must admit that with the release of this album, I'm finding it much harder to continue defending their music, as on this album, I'm hearing a lot of what people describe their first three albums to be like. Look to Windward opens the album actually quite well with these really nice and very subtle synth tones, and then does actually progress quite well to genuinely one of the heaviest moments in the whole Sleep Token discography. However, unfortunately, this moment is very short-lived, and I really wish that they just committed to that metalcore sound a little bit more, which definitely has to be consistently one of the album's biggest flaws, is the way they tease you with these epic heavy moments that just can never seem to commit to it, with each one only lasting a few seconds and all being so few and far between. And to be honest, this entire climax just feels completely pointless, with it then just going back to the sound it was giving you at the beginning, except this time with the dreaded trap beat, which is something that is far too present on this album on nearly every single song, and in a lot of situations ruins what could have been a perfectly good track. This track does have quite a nice bridge, I'll give it that, and then towards the end does again lean just a little bit back more into the metalcore sound, but nowhere near enough for it to actually be satisfying or worth anything. Emergence, I really feel like, is far too slow for its own good, and the weird vocal effects are really just annoying more than anything else and really just add nothing of any value to the song. And once again, can't go without mentioning the horrible trap beat that completely ruins an already not that great track. And Vessel's rapping of all things on this track is, to be fair, a solid attempt, however, just sounds completely out of place and does not at all match with how the song sounds. But once again, I think one of the very small positive takeaways from this track is just the bridge. It's very grand, very epic, and I do like that about it. Past Self opens with these really nice wind chime sound effects, and the vocals as well also sound surprisingly good on this track. However, it's just typical that that annoying drum machine trap beat has to come in and completely ruin it, which is a shame because this one really showed potential from the beginning and genuinely could have been a really cool and unique track. And then from that point onwards, this whole song is just so repetitive, so boring, and even by the time I get to the end of the track, the wind chime sound effects, which I really liked in the beginning, just become annoying and repetitive because they literally do the same thing for the whole track. They never go anywhere, become anything, or anything like that. Dangerous is a much better attempt at a song. You have this really suspenseful intro, which I do really like. However, I find that by the time it reaches the chorus, it's just so underwhelming and anticlimactic, with there being so many different sounds and instruments happening that just do not fit in at all. But despite such a disappointing first climax, towards the end of the track it does go for another one, which actually does sound really good. It's fantastic, it's epic, the guitar playing is also incredible, and by some absolute divine intervention, there is actually no trap beat on this song, which really should just be the default, but at this point that's actually something worth praising because of how annoying it is for pretty much the entire album. In Caramel, again, you have these really nice wind chime sound effects that once again still just do absolutely nothing for the whole song, and are of course immediately ruined by the trap beat, because they clearly just couldn't help themselves to go more than one song without using it. Eventually though, you do have some slightly more organic percussion coming in, and after that genuinely does evolve into quite a unique song. And after some pointlessly auto-tuned vocals, you then actually have a really good chorus, with absolutely incredible and very heavy guitar playing, which is overall just something that I think this album really needs more of. And then the outro as well is absolutely amazing as they go much more into metalcore, which all I can take away from this moment is that I really wish this album just had more of that. The much heavier metalcore is something that they are clearly very good at, so I don't know why they are just wasting their time with this trap, pop, whatever you want to call it, when they're clearly so much better at doing the heavier stuff. But unfortunately, like I said before, those moments on this album are so rare and just so pointless because of how short they are. A title track is then just complete filler, having nothing even remotely interesting about it, be it good or bad. There is somewhat of an attempt at a build-up to a climax, however, in the end just completely falls flat. Again, I do appreciate the lack of a trap beat on this song, however, it's just still completely meaningless to not have that, because it's still completely boring in every other way. Provider then just feels like much of the same, with it kind of alluding towards some sort of a climax, but instead just spends most of the song just meandering before you get there. It eventually does give you what it's been progressing towards, however, it just feels like one of the most generic and predictable climaxes I've ever heard, and still just completely lacks all the substance that it should have had. Damocles is probably the only song on this album that I actually just straight up enjoy, and I really do appreciate it for not trying to be anything that it's not. Just a very simple piano track, and it does a great job at just that. The vocals are really good, the piano playing is great, and even within the simplicity of this track, it still manages to show off a lot of different styles and influences. The lyrics are just a tad cheesy and a bit generic, but at this point I'll take what I can get, and there is still a lot to praise about this song. Gethsemane then brings you back into reality with the pointlessly high-pitched vocals during the intro, and then once again just goes into a very generic and predictable pop sound that really just can't seem to commit as to whether it wants to be pop or heavier rock, with it trying to balance between the two genres and ultimately just sounding so messy, with there just being absolutely no blending whatsoever between any parts of this song, and every single transition from one part to the next is always so harsh. And then on the latter half of this track, they manage to commit a little bit more to the lo-fi pop sound, however, it's still completely lacking substance, and of course the dreaded trap beat is still ever present on this song. And then Infinite Baths for a closing track really does just feel like more generic filler. There's the odd cool idea here and there that does get showcased, most notably some interesting synth tones in the second verse. However, on the whole, the song really does just feel like this never-ending cycle of showcasing a cool idea but not committing to it and then moving on to the next one before anything interesting actually happened. And then for the last minute or so of the song, they lean a bit more into black metal, which is something that I would really love to be able to praise just because this moment does actually sound really good. However, having such a short burst of it like that in an album that's nearly an hour long is simply not enough. And as great as this moment sounds individually on its own, I think that mixed in with the album, it only further contributes to this completely incoherent amalgamation of genres that make up the album. I really do think that up until this point in Sleep Token's discography, I have found it quite frustrating to watch so many people criticize them for things that I don't think are that bad. And I think a lot of the things that people didn't like about them would be almost like going and listening to a Beach House album and then complaining that it isn't metal enough, which is, the whole point, and I think that Sleep Token need to be treated in the same way. However, with the release of this album, I have just completely run out of defenses to be giving this band, because there is just absolutely no excuse for how bad this is. From everything from the terrible genre blending to the constant usage of annoying trap beats that don't need to be there, and they clearly just can never seem to be able to commit to a sound for this album, with there being so many moments that really show potential, but they can never actually make anything out of it. And so for this album, I'm feeling a 3 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.